never know really what's happening, and you can't help them. I want to work back with cutting through the matrix and just going through some of the mind-boggling things we have to contend with today. But as I say, unfortunately, most people are so conditioned, so incredibly indoctrinated from a very early age, massive indoctrination that continues with television all through their lives. And most people will watch 4 hours at least of television per evening, that you'll never snap them out of it. So this war is not between them and anyone else. It's only a war between those who know and those who are doing it and bringing it upon us all. You'll find there are historians who've taught themselves much of this material that I give out. You're self-educated as far as that goes, because the big professors in the universities tend to be, again, hand-picked and selected and belong to the Council on Foreign Relations in the Americas and the Royal Institute for International Affairs in Britain. They know what they're doing. These are the same professors who pick the Rhodes Scholars. They pick the ones who are going to be your future leaders of different countries in the world. These were also the same professors belonging to these same institutions who picked out the guys who became spies and double agents during the Cold War. Because at the very top, you see, the Royal Institute of International Affairs knew that they ran both sides. And the poor saps who became the spies didn't know that. They thought it was all very real. That's what Peter Wright eventually was finding out for himself, and he worked for MI5 and 6. So professors are paid for, bought and paid for. They're in the ivory tower. They have status, they have power, they get applause, and they're not going to give up their big fat salaries by telling the public the truth. That's how carefully constructed the system is. They don't make mistakes by promoting the wrong people to the top in any profession. We must be kept in the dark, and in the dark we certainly are. At least most people are. So the war, as I say, is between the 3% who understand this but don't have any power to sway it into any other direction except what we're doing, and those 3% who run the world and run the moneyed institutions of the world. That's what the war is about. And hopefully we can deflect this. As I say, it's like a big comet coming in. Hopefully we can just hit it in the right place and deflect it off in some other direction. When you see how long it's taken to get this far, which really is thousands of years, because the average person, if they go into Revelations, which is a revealing, remember, you reveal a plan. You don't prophesy a plan. You reveal it. That's why it's called Revelations. They have all of this. They have all of this in Revelations, if you understand the esoteric meanings. Now we've got a caller from Germany. Are you there?
Hello?
Yes?
Oh, hello, Alan. Thanks for taking my call. I just want, my name is Stefan Hartmann, I call from Germany. I just wanted to ask you about something about the importance of symbols, because you talk on different levels, and the one level is normal politics and the things that are going on, and another level is symbols that are encoded in movies and everything. And I just wanted to know, is it really important? Because you don't have to know about symbols to read something like Brave New World. What is the importance of symbols? That is my question.
The importance of symbols is that the symbols themselves are archetypal images. And this is what Carl Jung, if you go into his books on symbology, Carl Jung gave more out to the public probably than any other person. And these archetypal symbols, what it means is that every child in every nation, if you give them a pen and pencil and paper, they'll sit and scribble pretty well the same types of symbols, of stars and circles and so on. And the occult system that runs this use the very same symbols with slight variations here and there. They modify them slightly. But your subconscious mind does recognize these symbols, and they comprise a language of its own. And this language, when you see symbols repeated or given in a certain sequence, act like a language, a spoken language to your subconscious, and they can actually influence your behavior or your thoughts, because Jung himself reduced it down to conscious mind, subconscious mind, and then the unconscious mind. Unconscious doesn't mean totally dead. Unconscious means it's the big sea where all thoughts come from. It's from the unconscious you get your nightmares, where you could do things you would never do in real life, things that would be unthinkable for you to do. But they're dragged up from this big sea, this primeval sea that's within us all. It's also where the creative ideas can often originate from. So your subconscious or the unconscious even can recognize these archetypal symbols, and those who understand these sciences, because they're very, very old sciences, can put them in sequences and repeat them, and your behavior can be altered or modified just by you casually viewing them on a regular basis.
If I can recognize these signs, then I'm able to deflect that.
Yes, when you are conscious of what they are, you can deflect them. It takes a bit of practice, but you can actually do it. And it's much easier when you go into the symbols themselves and you understand every level of what each one means, because they can comprise a whole range of meanings, which alters again according to the sequence they're put together in. And when you understand all of the degrees of the symbols, then you have a shield up against their influence upon you, because your conscious mind thinks and recognizes them for what they are. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for calling. Now we've got Robert in Canada. Are you there, Robert? Hello?
Hi, Alan. How are you tonight?
Not so bad.
That's good. Robert in Halifax. A couple of weeks ago there, Alan, my girlfriend and I, we hosted a 9/11 truth party, and we had Dr. Bill Deagle for a guest speaker. Anyways, after the get-together, we put up some posters in her apartment building, just telling people in the building that we had hosted it and about the website and stuff. And a couple of days ago, we were looking at the posters, and someone had taken, it looked like a nail or something sharp, and they drove it into the wall where the word truth was. There's 9/11 truth, and they're putting holes in the word truth. Mm-hmm. It just seems like the word truth seems to scare people these days.
Yeah, truth. You understand, too, this is a high occultic term, truth. That's why they wrote it into the New Testament as well. And you have Pontius Pilate. Pontius is bridge, remember, and a pilot is one who navigates, the navigator, a Masonic term. And so you find that Pontius Pilate, when asked by Jesus what it meant, what truth was, he says, what is truth? In the occult Kabbalah, even today, that was heavily borrowed from ancient Kabbalah, regardless of what some will tell you. Even E. Wallace Budge, the deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphs, said that Kabbalah was far older, and he'd found that out by studying Egyptology. You'll find that truth doesn't exist as such in the Kabbalah. Neither does good or evil. There's only effects and guidance for those effects. And truth is something. See, truth tends towards morality or human behavior as being moral, and I'm talking about innate morality, not conditioned morality. In culture that we live in today, you'll find it doesn't matter what culture you live in, these are all modernly created cultures, and they could reverse them, all the values, tomorrow, and those would then become the norm. So to them in the high occult, truth is a dirty word. There's only the effects, and especially the planned and guided effects. Truth is a nasty word because it connotates that somewhere within humanity there's innate good behavior, and they don't want to believe that. They want to believe we're just animals. So I'm not surprised somebody would spike truth.
Yeah, it's just whenever anybody puts the bumper stickers around the universities, a lot of universities here in Halifax, people are tearing them down all the time.
Yeah.
But anyways, also I'd just like to invite your listeners to support you and just support the cause and buy your DVD.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So anyways, thank you, Alan.
Thanks for calling. Now I've got Tim in California. Are you there, Tim?
Hello?
Hello.
Yes, excuse me. I called in a couple of weeks ago, and I've been listening a lot lately. I had another question. It's not really a question, something that you spoke of, and I was wondering if I could get maybe a little bit more understanding of it. You talked about one time the power of a thought, and I'm wondering exactly what you meant by that. And can a thought actually be, like, weighed, or does it have a mass to it, what exactly is it? And I'll take the answer off the air.
Okay, I'll start with the latter part there. Can it be weighed and basically scientifically proven? The proof is self-evident, so science can't prove it. They can't weigh it, measure it. It's like spirit. They can't weigh it. They've tried and they've given some cons out that they could actually weigh spirit. But unless they can empirically prove it and repeat the experiment, they can't prove anything. But what they all admit to is that thought exists. They all have their own various theories about thought. And they do also admit that a thought that is spoken, and this is why you find in their book, the Old Testament, which is the rule book of a system, you'll find that first God spoke the world into existence. So speaking itself, speaking a thought, because first comes the big idea, then comes the will to use it, then comes the speaking or the ordering of it. That's all Masonic, and that's where they get it from. It's Genesis, or the gene of Isis, as they call it. And a thought itself can bring whole changes to the whole world. This was seen with all the great movements that led up to this totalitarian system we're going into in the Hegelian dialectic. So, however, you'll find that people like Arnold Toynbee, Professor Arnold Toynbee, who was a top globalist, and he taught the Rhodes Scholars back in the 1930s. There were two generations of Arnold Toynbees, both taught it, I think, at Oxford University in England. In the 1930s, 32, I think, he gave an international speech to the International Workers Association, because they ran the left and the right parties from London. And he said that a thought that is pure and intense can be picked up by certain people across the planet simultaneously, who will then take their idea and then bring it into action. So they themselves believe that a thought has a particular force outside of what science can detect. Now, we generally call it basic telepathy, a form that all children have. Children who are best friends when they're young will often start singing a song at the same verse at the same time, and they'll turn around and laugh at each other. And that kind of behavior is rapidly drummed out of you at school, where you're taught to behave, be quiet, and repeat after me. So they're very afraid of this particular little gift that animals actually have. There's no doubt about it. People who've observed animals in various professions would love to deny it, but they cannot deny that animals sometimes will all meet together at a certain place, even though they live miles and miles apart, and they have no idea how the word gets out and how they just know where to come at a particular time. So animals have this almost as a survival mechanism. I think people have a remnant of it too, some more than others. And the problem is, in this whole realm, don't go into the faker people, the fakeries that are out there. There's too many of them, all playing in the new age and pretending they're gifted in certain ways. Telepathy itself generally is not something that most people can switch on and off at will. It's not to do just with predictions either. But there's no doubt about it, a thought that's pure. And this goes back to the ancient Greeks, who talked about it as well. Plato, Democritus, and other ones talked about it, that a thought is like a form. They called it a form. The force of the thought they called forms. In other words, an invisible force that someone could put into existence from nowhere, or from somewhere they could never ever fathom. And once it was formed with a particular idea in mind, it could roam the planet for hundreds of years before it eventually faded away. And they were tremendous believers in these things, and we shouldn't poo-poo the ancient Greeks, because the aristocratic crew that comprised the philosophers in ancient times were certainly not romantics by any means. These characters were definitely empiricists. They studied the sciences. They had tremendous sciences at work in those days. And for them to admit to something like that means that they themselves believe it. And I know that in the high occultic circles, they still believe it today. You'll find that in countries like the US and Canada, the big Masonic groups or lodges are put out in what they call regions. The word region, even for the regionalization of countries, comes from Freemasonry, as does your educational system. They started out too. and they have their big lodges set up in triangles, and they have these triangular meetings on certain nights when they claim at the top themselves that they've forced their will upon all those inhabitants within the triangle. So whether you believe in it or not, there's no doubt that the ones at the top actually do. But that's what we're dealing with too. We're dealing with people who have created a form of atheism in society, and yet they actually have a belief within their own groupings, a belief linked to ancient times, to do not just with a form of telepathy, but to do with force. It's always to do with force, directed force, and power. And the three unworthy craftsmen, of course, really refer to yourself. Within yourself, you can have the good craftsman or the unworthy craftsman. You can either be Hermes Trismegistus, or it can be the three craftsmen that destroys the master builder, which is yourself again. And the first thing, of course, is thought. You have to have the thought or the plan, and you have to have action, and you have the proper emotion or intent. If any of them are wrong, the building project will end up in disaster. That's what it all really means. Hi, folks. I want to walk back with Cutting Through the Matrix. And just before we end up, I'd like to mention that I'm kept afloat here by people buying the books on the website and the discs, or donating. And I should really plug myself as my shameless self-promotion, because otherwise I won't be here very long. And this show is pretty well brought to you by yourselves, for those that contribute and keep it going and get something out of it. I don't go into the hype of terror, fear, fear, fear. I could certainly do so, but I refrain from doing that because there's no point in helping the big boys freeze you into submission through terror. And every day, if you read enough newspapers, there are dozens of articles and bills promoted by different politicians. These bills really are predictable, so nothing shocks me personally. I know the agenda, I know what's to come. So the names that bring particular bills forward for law introduction, they're irrelevant. The names are irrelevant. The people themselves are irrelevant, because if they weren't there, they'd simply pick other ones to put out the same bills. These guys don't run themselves. They're told what to do, and they're just little psychopaths at the bottom, and they want to get a name for themselves, of course. And we are run by psychopaths, unfortunately. They don't see themselves as being deviant. They see themselves as being superior, and they think the system is like the law of the jungle. That's why they have the Lion King. Read Rudyard Kipling's other Masonic works, and The Man Who Would Be King is a classic, well worth seeing. But the king of the jungle is the lion. And you'll find as far back as Babylon, it's really the small lion. Lon is lion, you see. And they've uncovered the walls and the gates of Babylon, and you'll see the two lions at the Lion's Gate, as they call it. London also has the Lion's Gate. At one point it was called that, before it was called London. And the Lion's Gate is because that's where they keep the royalty, the young lions. And the system is ancient. It never really changes. It always has the same descendants at the top, at the helm, navigating the ship. We are along for the ride, and to produce and consume, and to bring the great work into being for them, for their behalf, basically, not for our own benefit. And once our job is over, we're completely disposable. That's what they have lined up for us. Even this little tidbits about the robots, which is nice and funny, and all the rest of it, because there's lots of names you can imagine your new spouse can be called, like Rust Bucket and all this kind of stuff. But in reality, they're going to phase out the old types of humans that have these diversions of sexuality and contact, because the next type of human won't need those things. You'll be a true Borg, an original bee. An original bee, indeed. Well, from Hamish and myself, up here in Ontario, Canada, it's good night, and may your God or your gods go with you.
This is Melissa, and today is June the 11th, 2023. This is Redux number 113. It is from October 12, 2007, Alan's talk on RBN Radio, Meet Your New Spouse, Rutting with Robots, Clankers for Wankers. And the title says a lot there. Alan gets into how having a sexual relationship with a robot is being pushed, and he talks about how that is promoted through novels and in other forms of entertainment. This is a good talk for a lot of reasons, but I was speaking with someone the other day who said, when you think about everything that's going on in culture right now, what is being promoted, targeting the children with sexual imagery and the transgender agenda aimed and directed at them. And you think about what Alan often said about how before 9/11, the international censors got together and said, okay, so we have made homosexuality in movies acceptable. It's time to push forward bestiality and intergenerational sex. And that would be good to remind listeners of that. They can see the progression towards where we are today. Well, I cannot find those articles. Some years back, I did a little online search for them. And they've possibly gone down the memory hole. But Alan said that right before 9/11, a professor in the U.S. and a professor in Canada had made that remark after coming back from an international film censors gathering. And what I finally did was a keyword search with the parameter of just the month. I did the whole year before 9/11, and I came up with some interesting articles. But I narrowed that down to just August of 2001. And what was revealing to me was the sheer quantity of articles that had to do with movie rating, sex and violence portrayed in movies. And there were some scholarly studies that came out at that time, and then there were more popular fluff pieces. One in particular was in August of 2001 when New Yorker magazine covered Jack Valenti, who was the CEO of the Motion Picture Association of America, a very interesting organization. I looked around to see, what was going on in the news that kind of tied in to this theme of how things are promoted. And then I went back to the articles, and some of them were long. The one I'll put up from the New Yorker magazine, which is a profile piece covering Jack Valenti, is really interesting. And it led me to a whole line of inquiry. Because Jack Valenti, if the Motion Picture Association of America is a lobby group, lobbying Congress in Washington, D.C. on behalf of the film industry. I think at the time that it was created in 1922, it was representing 5 major studios. When this article was written in 2001, it was representing 7 major studios. And I think today it claims to represent all of the major studios, plus Netflix and a few other entities. But what was fascinating to me was the intertwining between Hollywood and Washington, D.C. And we've heard Alan talk about how the Pentagon has representatives who will work on a Hollywood movie. They'll work with the producers, and they'll give them themes that are going to be covered in the movies, and input on whether a fighter jet is the right fighter jet for the period piece. But it is more, it's a little bit more sinister than that. But when I looked into the Motion Picture Association and saw this total, there's no other way to say it, but marriage between Hollywood and Washington, D.C. And going through history from the very